How often have you felt restricted to spiritual practices that often seem outdated and of little relevance in today's world? Are you discouraged to express your own creative talents and develop spiritual practices that are uniquely you? The Liturgical Rebels podcast is for people like you who want to reimagine and reconstruct their faith and spiritual practices. It's for those who want to reshape belief and journey closer to God's wholeness with peace, justice, and flourishing, not just for themselves, but for the earth and all its inhabitants. Welcome to an unexpected episode of Liturgical Rebels. As many of you know, my last few weeks have been disrupted by Tom's Alzheimer's, growing confusion and admission first to hospital and then to an adult care home. It has been a challenging and distressing time, but in the midst of it, I have been upheld by an amazing community of friends and family. It made me aware of how important strong community relationships are for our emotional, physical, and spiritual well-being, not just during crises like this, but at all times. As you know, I've always believed in the importance of community and have lived in some form of community most of my adult life. These last few weeks made me more aware than ever of how important our community relationships are for all of us. Unfortunately, in the midst of the turmoil, I had to postpone my interview with Ray Minicon and instead reached out to my friend Forrest Inslee, who hosts Earthkeepers podcast. He recently interviewed Wes and Stephanie Vander Lugt in Charlotte, North Carolina, about their experiences as co-founders of Kinship Plot, an organization that envisions vibrant communities where people experience resonant relationships through stable housing, shared land stewardship, and creative, hospitable life together. Forrest and his co-host, James Armadon, graciously allowed me to repost this interview, which first appeared on Earthkeepers podcast. Kinship Plot provides one important example of community that is happening today. It is exciting to see this new community movement growing and thriving.
Friends, if there's anything I've learned in the last decade of caring and advocating for the good of creation, it's this. Our efforts are way more effective when we work in community with like-minded people. Of course, community is valuable in and of itself. As human beings, we were made to belong to one another. The trouble that our planet is in, I think, has a lot to do with the fact that people have become disconnected from their need for one another and for the more than human beings that make up the whole community of creation. In this episode, my co-host James and I will be talking with Stephanie and Wes Vander Lugt about Kinship Plots, a group of people who are seeking to create deeper, more intentional fellowship with one another in the context of the broader community of creation in their particular place. I think you'll find that this conversation will provoke you to examine your own needs for community and maybe give you some ideas about how to better meet those needs. Have a listen. Welcome to the Earthkeepers podcast. This podcast is for people who seek new and better ways to love and care for the earth. It's a podcast for anyone who is deeply concerned about the harm being done to the environment on a local and global level. It's a podcast that builds community and connection between people of like heart and mind, people who believe that earth care should be integrated into every aspect of life, and for many in the Earthkeepers community, that includes our spiritual lives. Welcome, friends, to the Earthkeepers podcast. Hey, friends, we are going to have a very interesting conversation today with the founders of Kinship Plot. But another reason it will be interesting is that Executive Director of Circlewood, James Armadon, who's also my good friend, is joining me. Welcome back, James. It's been a long time since you've co-hosted with me, way too long. And the reason for that, I'm sure, is that you've been really, really busy with some exciting new developments at Circlewood. What's been going on?
Yeah, thank you, Forrest. Well, first, it's really good to be back on the podcast. I have missed recording with you, and I'm very excited about our guests today. And you're right, it's been a really busy season at Circlewood. We recently finished our first building from which I am recording this podcast, the Sine Center for Ecological Learning out here on Camano Island in Washington. We are able to do on-site programs now, and the summer was full of young people, adults, people coming to visit, come for programs, and we've been building trails and getting oriented to how the building functions as a fully off-grid system. All that kind of stuff's been very, very exciting. So it's a time to slow down now for Circlewood a little bit and do some long-term planning, and the opportunities before us are incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I told you that we had the opportunity to welcome the founders of Kinship Plot to the Earthkeepers podcast, you really wanted to be part of that conversation.
Yes.
Tell us why.
Yeah, partially because I'm particularly interested in new expressions of faith and community that intersect with creation and social concern. And our role in Circlewood is to pay attention to what's developing. And these are really exciting experiments. Circlewood's one of them. So whenever we hear of somebody else doing something unique and different, we are really interested. And we often love to make connections and learn from what they're doing and share that with our listeners. So I'm really excited to learn more about Kinship Plot and how it came to be and what it's offering. So with that in mind, I'd like to introduce our listeners to Stephanie and Wes Vander Lugt. They're coming to us from Charlotte, North Carolina. They are the co-founders of Kinship Plot. And we'll start our conversation, Wes and Stephanie, by asking you to orient our listeners a little bit to who you are, what you do day to day, and something about the relationship to the place where you live. So, Wes, why don't you start?
Sure. Thank you so much for having us. Just a delight to be in the virtual room together. So my name is Wes, and I, with Stephanie, co-founded Kinship Plot 4 years ago. And it's a co-vocational expression. So I'm also a teacher and professor. Stephanie's a therapist. We come together to lead Kinship Plot. It's here in Charlotte, North Carolina, where we have resided for more than a decade now. And Kinship Plot is growing in really exciting ways in the northeast part of Charlotte. And we are rooted on 5 acres there.
Yeah, and I'll just add my greeting, Stephanie Vander Lugt. I'm really delighted to be here with you all. As Wes said, we co-founded Kinship Plot and co-lead it. That's how I spend half my time in bringing that to life. And my other role is I'm a clinical social worker. But there's a lot of integration. I actually focus on how nature and earth are part of the healing process. And so I integrate that in my direct practice as well. And so it's an absolute delight to be here, to be having a conversation, like you said, James, about experiments, because we often call Kinship Plot a living laboratory or a living experiment or an emerging experiment, because we are and have been just trying things without too much to model it after, though there are so many to learn from. And so it's a real joy to be here with you all.
So why don't we start with just defining what Kinship Plot is, if that's even possible, and maybe how it came to be.
Yeah, I'll give it a shot, and then Stephanie can jump in. Kinship Plot is an intentional community that cultivates resonant relationships of every kind. So that means relationship with God, relationship with each other, and relationship with the land and the earth and all its inhabitants, and how all those relationships are interconnected. We started dreaming about this during COVID, of all times, when we were cut off from some of these relationships. Although not the earth. We came to love nature preserves during COVID a lot. But dreaming about what it would look like for these relationships to really come alive. And where could we invest ourselves in a place and a community where we can experience and model a different way of being together with God and each other and the earth in a culture and a time when there's so much division, there's so much alienation, and in a culture of speed where we often don't take the time to even reflect on what kind of relationship do I want with this place and with these people and with the divine. And so we took off from there. Stephanie, you want to say a little bit about the beginning of Kinship Plot?
Sure. Yeah. And I think you said it well, Wes, that Kinship Plot was born out of a lot of longings, a lot of aches, and we felt them in ourselves. But then as we started gathering people, we heard it from almost everyone else. So we just tried some things, and we were very limited during COVID because it was difficult to even gather people. But we started, and we found a team that said yes to what we were envisioning, which was really unique because some other folks would say, what? What is that? Or, okay, that sounds nice, but how? And we didn't really know. We didn't have a map, but finding other people who said, yes, let's try this and let's take the first step. We actually just started as we were able to, as it made sense as we emerged from COVID, just in our home, in and around our home. And so our first gatherings were in our backyard. The main gardens where we grow most of our food, a number of them are still surrounding our house. And in this community, we turned our yard into a community garden because we didn't know where the larger rooted expression would be. And so we just started doing these things. And one of the ways that we talk about Kinship Plot, because you're right, it is hard to put words around it sometimes, is we love the word plot. And there's a reason it's in that name. And we think about the 3 meanings of plot as a way to understand. So, of course, there's plot as a story, what stories we are participating in, maybe consciously or unconsciously, and then therefore, which stories do we want to begin to tell anew or weave together. That's our individual stories, and then our communal stories, and then, of course, the theological story and the story of the place and the earth where our feet touch the ground. And so that's the first meaning of plot. And the second is as an actual place, as an actual plot of land. And of course, that's exceedingly important. We find that to be unattended, especially in Christian circles or some of the communities where we have found a home before, that's just not really upheld as being as important to discipleship, to our life with God, is where our feet touch the ground and our relationship to ecosystem, our relationship to plants and animals and waters and trees. And then finally, plot as a scheme. We really view it as a way to be plotting together subversively to undermine the plots, the schemes, the evil schemes, really, the forces that are at play in our world that are continuing that story of division and separation and disconnection. And so those 3 meanings of plot guide us and frame what Kinship Plot is all about.
Yeah, I love that. That word community seems to encompass a lot of different modes of participation in the Kinship Plot sphere. I wonder if you could give us a sense of the many possible ways that community is practiced.
Yeah, there's the core community, of course, that is our small team, our board, our wisdom council, those who are joining the team, and then everyone that we invite into Kinship Plot's activities and life together, which will eventually be this intentional community with tiny homes and others living in proximity. Right now it's gatherings at the land as we're gardening together and meeting, but also kind of all over the city, including our home, that we're meeting together as a community to eat together, to work the land and get our hands in the soil together, to learn together. We offer various learning opportunities that also include people all around the world. We've had cohorts with folks joining from all time zones in the US, from the UK, from all over. But the ultimate goal and vision is that we are living in proximity together as an intentional community. on the same plot of land, sharing resources, sharing that place. And as we do so, we're learning to be in community with the whole community of creation, all of the living inhabitants of this place, and learning their names and cultivating the ones that have been here for a long time and trying to get rid of ones that are invasive, and building habitats not just for human beings who really need housing, and affordable housing being a big part of our vision, but beautiful housing for all creatures. And what does it look like to create a home together?
Yeah, I'm really resonating with the description of what you're working towards. I also resonate with your origin story, because when Circlewood started, we had a little bit of trouble explaining to people what we were doing. And partly it's about discovering as you go. We know we're leaving something behind. We know what we're reacting against and looking for, but what shape that takes often requires a lot of time and patience. And I really admire how you're going about this, because it's a big vision, trying to draw all of this together in a new way. I'm also resonating with the need to find some fresh language for things. And I was thinking about your word plot and how many different ways you can understand that, and thinking about the story aspect of that and bringing it together. I'm wondering about the stories that make up Kinship Plot, the people, the land. Can you give us a sense of what life in that community is like? And is there a particular story in which you see the vision of Kinship Plot coming together?
Yeah, there's probably going to be multiple stories, but I can think of a couple recently. We plant a lot of things in our food forest, but we did a number of potatoes and onions and invited the community to come and harvest. And it just so happened that the church where we're sharing land, they host a freedom school. So they had 60 scholars from the community, and they asked, oh, can they come out and harvest potatoes and onions? And we said, okay. And we had probably close to 40 young people, children, just descend upon the food forest. And many of these are young people and children that have never really gotten their hands in the soil, not anytime recently, or maybe not very often at least. And so we did a demonstration on how to dig up potatoes and how to find onions. And you would look out into the food forest and you would never know that there's potatoes and onions out there. But once they learned how, it was better than an Easter egg hunt. Some of these kids, just to hear their squeals and their excitement and how much they loved learning how to find potatoes and onions, and said, when can we come back? And so that's just a little picture as we open our hearts and open our space to anyone who happens to be nearby to encounter the delights and the abundance of the land. I could tell you story after story of the groups of all ages, generations that come from the community to co-labor. They think they're coming to work, but we often wander around picking and smelling herbs and even doing a little tasting. And to see how moved people are in so many ways by just that experience of a container of invitation to encounter and be encountered by plants, by animals, by herbs, by trees, and to interact with it. That's often what comes to mind when I think of stories of Kinship Plot, how it expresses itself.
One of the stories I love to tell about Kinship Plot is the first kinship dinner we had in our backyard. We've continued to host these kinship dinners, various locations, both in our home and around the city and elsewhere. But there was such a hunger to gather. This was right after the pandemic. But also just the beautiful opportunity to be together outside for community and at every level. We gathered and had time to be quiet and listen to the birds and recognize the other community members of creation that were joining us in this feast, to appreciate the food that we were feasting over in a slow kind of way, and just to celebrate really good gifts. We often don't pause to celebrate the daily gifts that we're constantly receiving, whether fresh air, the food that we're sharing, relationship with each other. And every time we gather for a kinship dinner, I think it's the simplicity of that celebration that's so moving for people. This is not complicated. What we need resonant relationship with the earth and with each other and with the spirit. And it's there on offer constantly.
What you're saying makes a lot of sense in that in some ways trying to meet these longings that we all have can be so simple. It can be as simple as setting a common table and inviting people to share. And yet I know what you're doing is really hard at the same time. And I think it's helpful for people to know some of the struggles. What's difficult about trying to do this? I mean, you're obviously juggling other responsibilities in your life and trying to cast this vision. What are some of the things that make the work challenging?
When we started Kinship Plot, the vision was always to be on a plot of land. And we were on 0.2 of an acre in urban West Charlotte. And some days it was discouraging because we saw the price of land and saw all around us land being gobbled up for highly dense developments. And there were moments when I just didn't believe that we would be able to live into that full vision. To finally be in partnership with a church that has shared our vision and is generously donating this land, leasing over the land for us for free use, is the end of a really long journey, a 3-year journey of looking and praying and longing to find the right spot. But even now, we have land. This is amazing. How is the land zoned? What are we able to do and not able to do on the land? 40 years ago, there was a pond here, and when they expanded Harris Boulevard, they filled in the pond with construction debris. So it's contaminated, and we can't drill a well. So how do you work with the real conditions of the place? And it's a beautiful piece of land, a real treasure right in the middle of the city, but it's wounded, and it's going to take a long time to slowly bring this place to its full life. And to bring ourselves to life there. So recognizing there is a slowness to this journey that we believe in as a value. Slowness, quality over quantity, going at the pace of trust in a relationship. But it can be frustrating as well.
So I have to say that one of the things that's really fascinated me about Kinship Plot as I've learned more about you is this motif, as you call it, that emphasizes contemplative practices that lead to action. And honestly, in terms of practice, I think most people would think of those as opposite ends of a spectrum, right? But how do you make sense of that dichotomy? And what does contemplative action actually look like in the life of a community?
In Western cultural traditions, there is this tendency to divide up the parts of who we are. That there's my thinking part, my feeling part, my doing, so head, heart, and hands, however you want to articulate that. But we're whole people. Action is always unconsciously or consciously connected to what we're thinking, what we're feeling, the state of our heart and mind, whether for good or ill. So part of that value or that motif of contemplative action is wanting to be really intentional about connecting these aspects of our humanity and our common life together. And that the most effective action individually and communally comes from deep groundedness and a stable center in our identities, in our relationship with God and each other. So these motifs, like contemplative action, it doesn't equal a particular program per se, but it's an emphasis that weaves through all of what we do and how we approach it. You want to say more about that, Stephanie?
Yeah, absolutely. And I really appreciate what you said about the different parts of us. And I'm thinking about how we, in reflection on action, which is another way of saying it, or action on reflection, seeing these as part of the same thing that's always happening and interwoven. There really isn't a difference between what you're doing and how you're thinking and sensing. We like to separate these. In fact, we see it in a lot of the climate action conversation or climate crisis or the anxiety around living in an age of mass extinction, where people will immediately want to say, well, what should we do? What should we do? And we're doing something even in asking that question anxiously, right? We're always thinking and doing. And so trying to bring those into more dynamic relationship together, that will happen throughout any of our offerings and programmings, even in and with and throughout. I mean, Wes and I were very influenced by a mentor who would stop at regular intervals and whatever was happening and say, what are you learning? What are you learning? And even if there hasn't been some sort of lecture or something, even in the doing, even in the interacting, in the listening to each other, there is a learning, and then that learning and wondering shapes our action together. So that's a little bit of what we mean.
And one example of that, when we lead a open garden day, for example, inviting the community to come work with us, rather than just orienting everyone practically, today we are weeding the fruit tree guilds or whatever the case may be. Stephanie will often do this. She'll lead the whole group in a grounding reflection. Let's listen to where we are. Let's look and see who is here and are we fully here?
This shows up very much in our apprenticeship. So we run an apprenticeship from May to August, and absolutely it's a very practical, hands-on learning, but we are always reflecting together, beginning, middle, and end, and learning together. We really frame it as this is not about some of us are teachers and others of us are learners, but we are all apprenticing. We are being apprenticed to the land, and we are learning together. And so there's sharing of knowledge, and we're regularly, daily, weekly, and as a whole, reflecting on how we're being shaped and formed by what we're learning, what we're doing, and regularly throughout wondering, okay, what have we tried? We love to reflect regularly and reframe all the time. Never a failure, always a lesson. So the year when we grew one sweet potato, that was hard because it looked like a failure. And the following year, we grew hundreds of pounds of sweet potatoes. And the land said, here's what you needed to know. And our teachers corrected us, and we reflected and we learned and practiced. So yes, we might call that success, but there was also a gift in the not knowing and the needing to reflect and reorient it and be reformed so that we could be responsive.
So it's really clear that the core values that makes Kinship Plot what it is are feeding into these programs and guiding them. One of them that I find really interesting, I want to hear some more about, is your motif of liberatory welcome. That's putting two words together that don't often go together. And I'm imagining it means more than being very hospitable, although that's important. In fact, I'd love to read your description and then get some more thoughts. So this is how your website describes it. Whether we are gardening, creating, learning, or gathering, we believe in open doors and liberatory spaces where all are wildly welcome. This offer of liberatory welcome is often the first step toward recovering resonant relationships, and this includes welcoming all members of the more than human world who are entangled with and enhance our lives. That's a lot to unpack there. Can you do a little bit of that for us? What does it mean to wildly welcome the community around you?
I love that word wild. There's multiple resonances there. But for me, part of it is wild welcome. You can think it's large. There are no limits on this welcome. So anyone is welcome in any capacity, completely who they are. So often I find no matter the space, whether it's in a nonprofit or a church or other communities, we always have conditions on our welcome. It seems. And some of that's natural, and it's good to have limits and things to a certain degree. But to have a wild liberatory welcome means it's going to be messy. We can't predict what will happen when we open the doors that wide. And we want it to be more expansive than just human welcome as well. So the wild is also resonant of the world in which we live and not wanting to walk over all of the other creatures that are in this place. What does it look like to have a wild welcome for the trees and the birds and other aspects of the place as well?
How do you break down that word liberatory?
So obviously it's connected to liberation and what it means to be set free and set others free and allow everyone to be set free in the things that we do together. Oftentimes, our most liberating activities do need containers and invitations where we say, here, within this space, be free. And that is often what we're doing. We are creating a container for a gathering or a dinner or some work together. Because within that constraint and that invitation, that container, it actually is amazing how people feel more free to be able to move around and interact and be encountered. And I'll give you a very specific example. In our urban context, when we first arrived, we had this front yard space, but it is right up against a very busy road. And we have small children and we invite others with small children. So we created a fence. And within that fence, we were able to grow food and actually have life and have a liminal space where we ended up interacting with our neighbors and being able to invite people in, even though we built a fence. Because at that point, it was now within this space, we can be free and you can be free. So now I can invite you in. And so maybe another word that I like to use is containers. Oftentimes, our most liberating activities do need containers and invitations where we say, here, within this space, be free. And that is often what we're doing when we are creating a container for a gathering or a dinner or some work together. Because within that constraint and that invitation, that container, it actually is amazing how people feel more free to be able to move around and interact and be encountered.
Yeah, it's a way of actually reimagining limitation as a place of abundance. That pecan tree is only going to give pecans. It's not going to drop walnuts for us. And that's a wonderful limitation. We want it to just do pecans well. So it's recognizing not everyone needs to do everything or be everything, and receiving each member of the community for who they are, not who we want them to be.
A wonderful thing I just want to mention is the church that we are partnered with. This is their phrase. We actually kind of riffed on it and now share it with them. They do talk about everyone being wildly welcome and really practice that as a church community and welcoming all. And I think express that in a way that is full of love and care and openness, and coming to relationship together has been incredible because of what I think Kinship Plot brings to that as we incorporate the land and the earth and the place.
I'm thinking about liberatory welcome as part of Kinship Plot's work is to create the containers, create the spaces where that kind of work can happen. And I'm wondering, in terms of liberation, what do you think people are needing to or looking to be liberated from? And what do you see people being liberated for?
We want people to be liberated from a kind of restlessness, constantly being on the move, rootlessness. It's freeing to be rooted. And you can do that anywhere. You can learn to do that right here in the middle of the city. And wanting people to experience that who live on Kinship Plot, but also guests who just come for one dinner or someone who joins a learning cohort with us, that being entangled with people in a particular place is a good thing. It's how we're created to be.
I think I would also love to see people being liberated from the need to control or master. And this is another term that goes with resonance and the teachers of resonance, which is uncontrollability, and how often this is what we've been told to do or taught to do, to control and master the places that we are, master our lives. I can pick up and leave and go somewhere. That'd be a good thing. I can be the master of that. So actually to submit to the places that we are and to release control over that so that we can deeply enter into the places where we live.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that idea of submitting to place. I think what you also mean by that is submitting to people, right? Submitting to the community of that place. And that community is widely defined. And in fact, I think that whole idea of connection, of relationship is really core to your ethos. It involves relationship between people and people, between people and their places, between people and the whole community of creation. Knowing what I've been able to glean about your community, I've tried to imagine what it might be like to be part of it. And when I do, I get this intuition, this feeling that there's this other level of relationship that maybe isn't overtly stated as a core purpose, but it's nevertheless at the heart of the Kinship Plot ethos, I'm thinking. And that is the cultivation of loving relationship between a person and their very selves. What I mean by that is living and learning and loving in community the way that you do, I'm guessing has to inevitably move individuals to take an honest look at their own lives, their histories, their vocational decisions, their motivating values, and their worldviews, really. And I can't help but think that living the way you do, a person might also come up against deeper needs that they perhaps aren't aware of and yet are unconsciously acting out of. Now, am I just projecting what I want to be true, or is that in fact something that you see happening among the folks involved with Kinship Plot?
Yeah, absolutely. We probably should make that more overt. I love that. And it is so fundamental. And I mean, personally, as someone who works with individuals toward healing, it's exceedingly important and fundamental. And a lot of the imagination that we want to cultivate when we're talking about relationship is very connected to systems thinking, right? What is our role in this community, in this system? And actually, in working with individuals, we also are systems inside of ourselves. And oftentimes have had ways of being in the world that actually harm us or are causing us distress because there is some part of you that's taking the lead rather than you. So even seeing ourselves as a system and inviting that kind of reflection, even as we're on our knees together, weeding. I mean, there is nothing that leads to some really deep conversation like working together, like co-laboring together. And almost always it leads to people being healed by each other and then finding that for themselves. So that is absolutely key. Each human, each soul is so precious. Being open to receive each one and who they are, the little system that they bring. Hopefully, their experience with Kinship Plot does lead to personal healing for them.
You know what actually spawned that question in particular is, again, I was doing these imagination exercises, wondering what it must be like to be where you are. And it really caused me to get a little achy in my heart, right? I just thought, oh my gosh, what is it about what they're doing that strikes me as so beautiful and strikes me as something I long to be part of, something like that, right? And when I stop and think about that, I realize that what that is this longing for community, this need to belong, this calling to be part of something more. And I've experienced that before and really thrived in those contexts. But those are really hard contexts to find or even to develop. And so I've had to put aside that part of me and ignore it so that I don't always feel sad or always feel the longing. And that's not exactly a healthy dynamic, but it's an example, I think, of what I mean by people coming to love themselves, to have better relationship with themselves, their deeper drives, their motivations, their essential self.
I find too that often people are just longing for a space to give and receive stories. And I notice that a lot, whether we're gardening out in the food forest or at our dinners, that people are just sharing parts of themselves, part of their stories, and kids sharing with adults and vice versa, so the intergenerational aspect of Kinship Plot, I think, is really important too, seeing each other in different parts of the journey and almost seeing adults recover a little bit of their childlike selves as they're just out and about, kind of in wonder over this place.
Yeah, I can see that a key theme of Kinship Plot and a key theme of this conversation is belonging. And I'm imagining so many of our listeners just feeling that same ache that Forrest articulated, that we all have this deep desire to belong to a place and belong to a people and feel that sense of rootedness in which, as you've articulated, you actually are more free to be yourself, to be part of something. How would you counsel those who are listening with that ache to maybe take a step or two towards more resonant relationships, towards putting down some of these kind of roots, which can actually be scary? It can make us feel vulnerable. We don't always know where to start. What kind of advice would you give to people?
One of the practices that we suggest in some of the cohorts we've done is the simple practice of learning names. And this can be done at any level, and human as well as other than human, whether you have a small apartment and whether you're living in a larger place, you can learn the name of that tree outside your window. You can learn the name of one native plant in your neighborhood, learn the names of your human neighbors. Speaking of stories, I really believe that names are a portal into story, into really getting to know the history of a person or a creature and what makes them tick and what they need. So that can be done at any level.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing I would say is begin small, do something. We didn't really have a map, but we had longings and we knew how to do some things. And so we just started doing them. And a lot of that actually had to do with making invitations. So I often will say, consider the invitations you can make and then consider the invitations you can receive, because it does take intentionality. This is not an easy linear process. Being in community is not always easy. And so the other thing that I would encourage is having whatever it means to increase capacity for what is hard about community. Well, what do we need to become more skillful at as a modern disconnected people in order to stay in community? What do we need to grow in terms of relational skills in order to not just start, but actually stay and really cultivate those communities? I really do think as sort of modern displaced Western people, we've inherited generations of losing many of those skills. So I think that is also at play.
I think another factor there of what you're talking about, Stephanie, is just the sheer pace of our lives. And I think in order to experience rootedness and belonging, there has to be some rhythm in our lives of stopping and standing still. It's like the Sabbath tradition. And I love how Mary Oliver puts it. She says in her instructions for living a life, it's all about standing still, paying attention, and then being astonished and telling about it. But it's that standing still that many of us skip over that step. We just pay attention along the way as we're going about our lives, business as usual. And I think that's deeply countercultural.
Speaking of counterculture, I'm sure that Kinship Plot as a community is aware that they are living in ways that are counter to the dominant culture around them, obviously in North America, but I would say just Western culture in general doesn't share these kind of values that we're talking about. For that reason, I think a lot of people are paying attention to what you're doing, and that includes Circlewood. We're watching what you do with fascination and hope. I wonder, what impact do you hope Kinship Plots might have for the greater good, or is it enough just to focus on the community of your place at this point?
I would hope that paying attention to the community of our place does contribute to the common good, and hopefully, as you said, inspires others to practice that in their own places. From day one, we've had folks, even before we really knew anything of what we were doing, not that we do now, but even from day one, I remember the first emails. This is interesting. How can we do this in Michigan? And I thought, I have no idea. I don't live in Michigan. But knowing that in submitting to our place, these people, this story, no one can shortcut that work for us. We can't buy a toolkit that will make that happen. So I think that comes to mind.
Yeah, I think in some ways we want to do what good artists do, which is focus on one thing, making one thing beautiful, explore one metaphor, trace out this one melody. And by focusing on the beauty of that particular, it becomes this sort of universal inspiration. Good artists aren't focusing on everything, right? And so in some sense, it's like perhaps by some act of grace, we can be for the greater good by being for this smaller good right here in this place.
Yeah, I think what you've said is really important. You can't franchise this work. You can't put it into a toolkit and just ship it off somewhere else. What you can share is the values, the process by which imagination and place looks in these different places and with different communities. And that's the joy of seeing things like Kinship Plot and other communities popping up all over the place. People's imaginations are beginning to be unlocked. And there's a commonality between Circlewood and Kinship Plot, but our expressions look very different. And that's a strength. And that's freedom. That's freedom to say, whoever you are, wherever you are, there's good work to be done. And it's your task and your joy to figure out what that looks like where you are. But it could look like so many different things. And I find that exciting, even if a little daunting. But I think it can be freeing to people who think, oh, look what they're doing and we can't do that. Well, maybe you can't, but there's something you can do that's only yours and your communities to do. And I'm just hoping more expressions like Kinship Plot can pop up. What you're doing is helping people begin to see what's possible. So I want to say thank you for your work and your conversation with us today.
In this inspiring interview with Wes and Stephanie Vander Lugt, conducted by Forrest Inslee and James Armadon of Earthkeepers podcast, we learned much about the importance of community and of sharing life with others. In our next episode, I will interview April Yamasaki, author of Hope Beyond Our Sorrows, Learning to Live with Life-Changing Loss. April lost her husband a couple of years ago, and I found her book very helpful as I too walked through my own loss of a husband who is still present and yet not present. April is a pastor, editor, author, and spiritual formation mentor in Canada. She currently serves as resident author with a liturgical worship community, edits Rejoice Daily Devotional magazine, writes online and in print publication, and often speaks in churches and other settings. I am Christine Sine, author of Celtic Advent, Following an Unfamiliar Path, a devotional book that guides us through the 40 days of Celtic Advent beginning on November 15th. My other books include The Gift of Wonder. I also facilitate the God Space Light website and write regularly on Substack, where I am currently sharing about Lent and about my own personal journey. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the podcast. Please also share it with your friends or join me on Substack, Instagram, or Facebook.